My name is Osku and I'm talking about how to build an application security program from scratch. And you might have met me before, so my name is Osku. I'm Chief Security Architect at Sanoma Media Finland, co-founder of HelSec, and I hang around at the various security communities in Finland and do lots of stuff. And I have some public and open source software you can find on my GitHub. And one example is the ASCAN, which is linked here. And a tool that I'm going to talk about tonight is also released as open source in GitHub. And meanwhile, I do a lot of security and software development. What I really like is being somewhere else than at the front of a computer. Anyway, let's get started. So the agenda for this presentation is I'll give a really short introduction to what is application security and what's an application security program, how I started developing one, and the things I've learned. And um, first, a couple disclaimers. So these views are fully mine, and the opinions are mine. This is more a piece of opinion than an authoritative reference to application security. And also, I'm kind of still figuring everything regarding application security out while I'm working with the subject at work, so your mileage may vary. Anyway, what's application security? So it's all the stuff you do as part of your software development workflow that are anyway or in any way related to the security of the end results, the actual software product you're working on. So it's all the stuff you do in design, development, and deployment, whatever, upgrade, maintenance, and so all the activities you do before and after the software gets developed and during. An application security program is kind of the concerted effort, the systematic effort to introduce these activities into your application development workflow. And if you don't have an application security program, then you kind of can't really know if the software you're developing is secure or not. So it's kind of a really good idea to have an application security program if you do like software development. And there are, of course, some challenges. You can't really define in general terms or definite terms what an application security program should contain because every organization does things in their own way and every software development process is unique. So you can't like develop an application security program that applies to absolutely every situation. And you can have like everything between a waterfall model used in some fairly conservative organizations, or you can do stuff in a very agile way as depicted here. And also your risk profiles could be really different. You might be developing software that controls, for example, power plants, and they have their own kind of security profiles. You want to be certain of some things in those situations, or you might do something that doesn't really have anything worth stealing or hacking into. And so the application security measures need to be kind of adapted to the particular security posture of your situation. There are some reference models to what application security is. I'm mentioning the SAM or Software Assurance Maturity Model by the OWASP organization. And it's a fairly kind of heavy way of defining how an organization could do stuff in a secure way. It doesn't always apply to every situation, but it can be a useful reference. And I mentioned it's fairly heavy, so the SAM by OWASP defines a lot of stuff. It's more about defining how an organization can be secure and mature with regards to security, but they don't really offer like really good tools to actually apply to practice. So as an example, let's look at some details in the SAM model, like the strategy and metrics. So if you kind of go and see what's in the SAM, you see that this is kind of what's in the strategy and metrics part. So if you want to develop your organization to be really mature and you reach the highest level 3, then you have the statement that you need to align this application security program to support the organization growth. And I don't know what it kind of means in practice. You can't really take that as a guidance to kind of define specific activities to take. And another reference is the Microsoft Secure Development Lifecycle. It's also useful in its own way, and I included this slide only because the particular picture which is here is fairly kind of illustrative. So if you have a software development lifecycle, there's all kinds of things going on, and in absolutely any phase and every phase of your development lifecycle, you should be paying attention to some particular security aspect. Anyway, that's for the introduction. So now I'm going to talk about how I created our application security program. So kind of my first thought, because I wasn't kind of familiar with the subject at all, I hadn't done this before, my first thought was that I'll be just like figuring out how to do things in a secure way, and then kind of discuss with the developers that this is how you do things, and then we would somehow magically start doing stuff in a more secure way. But that didn't really happen, and I'm going to explain why. So first, let's have a look at how corporations usually plan stuff. And I can't say this applies to absolutely every corporation, but I've seen a couple larger companies, and I think this is something that I found that applies to all of them, or most of them anyway. So you have a lot of stuff going on with regard to working on standards and reporting and governance and metrics, and in really many cases there's a lot of tools used to kind of maintain documentation and specifications. You have a lot of documents that are stored in different places, and people are working on different things, and often if you want to know a certain thing or get to know a certain metric, you would need to find out the particular person who is responsible for that. Then you end up um, in a kind of maze of PowerPoints and Excel documents, and it's really hard to get a grasp or a general idea of how things work. And if you want to kind of link software development to all of this, it's even more difficult because developers don't often work with a lot of Word documents stored in SharePoint and Confluence documents. They're mostly interested in writing software. So you have the developers in some remote corner, and they are doing their own stuff and they are good at it, but they don't talk PowerPoint and Excel. And then of course you have the actual threats, which are like hackers, and they don't care if you're compliant and if you have audit trails. They just want to steal your stuff if they have motivation to do so. And too often, like actual data breaches or security incidents look like this. So you might have a large security budget, or maybe you have none, but it doesn't matter at all. You might have some processes to make sure you comply to standards, either your own internal standards or external standards. But also that doesn't matter, because if there's anybody motivated to breach you, steal your stuff, or whatever, they will always find the kind of easiest way in. That could be, for example, a Jenkins box that some developers set up a couple of years ago and forgot the box on top of the shell or something. So you would want to kind of avoid this from happening. Then we think about application security in general terms. I'm kind of drawing the analogy to how to navigate a sea kayak. So it's kind of you need to know where you are and then figure out where you want to go and then just go there. So it's like really simple, just as navigation in life. So regarding appsec navigation, so if you want to know where you are, you need to have some metrics and tools. And that's what I did. Kind of that was the first thing I did when I was developing our application security program. I wasn't aware how things were done, so I started figuring out tools, and this is kind of one of the subtopics of this talk. I'll get to tools in a moment. And if you want to think about where you want to go, it's a very good idea to look at the metrics you've just gathered and make some good judgments based on your findings from the metrics. And you might also have some KPIs or key performance indicators your organization has before you started building your application security program, so you want to possibly align with those. And when you have all that in place, then you just need to look at what you got, your metrics and prioritizations, and figure out what's most important, or um, which actions are most likely to increase your security. And of course, the ultimate goal is that developers would create secure software. This is about application security, so developers are kind of the focus group here. They are doing all the actual work. So let's start with metrics. So I wanted to assess the security level of the stuff that we were doing at work. So we would need a set of requirements and means to record our requirements, and we would need to do this for all the projects we had of any importance. And any importance means that if it's something that brings money to the house or contains data that whose nature is that if you breach it, then it would become a problem for the company. The sum by OWASP I just mentioned, it's kind of nice and cool, and from the OWASP website they link to some random company who's offering a tool that kind of contains the requirements of the sum model in a form that you can fill out, and it would give you something based on that. But as I mentioned, sum is more about measuring how mature your organization is, but it's not exactly a tool to measure your software development processes. Or if it is, then it's kind of, I find it a bit remote from the actual kind of daily activities of writing software. Also, like, things are really connected, and if you start to write if you start to define metrics, you don't really like have a blank slate to begin with, so you already have a lot of stuff going on in your organization. For example, in our case, when I started writing metrics for application security, the people from the compliance and legal teams told that they kind of already know part of the stuff I was collecting. And some teams, for example, which were like doing a really heavy infrastructure as code kind of stuff, they, for example, sold some requirements that are related to disaster recovery. And some other teams or some other products that didn't do that but used some outside services, they had kind of different situations and so on. And the challenge would be kind of to combine all the different interests and all different situations in a single set of metrics, which is still simple to use. But because I didn't know where to start, I talked with some friends from the great HelSec and CitySec community working in different companies. You maybe know who you are. And asked, how did you do these kind of things? And then I got some guidance, and that led me to develop a tool called Security Self-Assessment. And it's, by the way, in GitHub. The link might be visible in the talk at a later time. The idea of the self-assessment, security self-assessment, is that it's a simple web application that basically contains a configurable form or many forms. And the forms have questions, and you can answer yes or no to the questions and maybe provide some notes. And all those questions and answers, they have associated point values and outcomes. You basically get a score out of that. And each form is a JSON file. So if you want to have your own requirements in this tool, you just write your own JSON file with requirements. Then what comes out of that, there's a risk level. It's basically a measure of the nature of your data. For example, if you have really detailed private data about individuals, then you have a higher score. And if they contain data that you know belongs to minors, then that's a higher risk level, and so on. And if you have a lot of data, then you have a higher risk level and so on. And the rest of the questions, they are kind of organized into categories that belong to different stages in the application development lifecycle. So there's a bunch of questions that probe the security posture of your like design phase and development phase and operations and stuff like that. And all the questions are fairly simple. They're like really stupid questions, like do you take backups or do you do um, input validation at all? And is your input validation based on whitelisting and so on? And this is because I really want to measure if simple things are done correctly and the most basic stuff, because if any breach happens due to a technical vulnerability or technical weakness, it's always the really stupid and simple stuff. So this is more about when we start an application security program, we want to get the simple stuff right and try and keep the very low level, low skilled, opportunistic hackers out. So that's what I started with. And the question, does it like really work in practice? I don't know. It remains to be seen. We started using it, but at least so far it looks like it might be useful. So developers like it because the questions provided by the tool, they are fairly simple. They ask for the simple and basic stuff. And the presence of these questions to developers already is helpful because developers are exposed to kind of ways in which things could be done the right way. And other people in the organization, they need some kind of more persuasion to um, kind of get to like the tool, because a lot of other people who are not software developers, they anyway work on things that have a security angle. So for example, the compliance people think that I'm kind of collecting things that already exist in some other tools, some data catalogs or asset catalogs. And some other compliance teams might also think that we already have defined like a process how to do things. So it's somewhere in SharePoint or somewhere in Wiki or Confluence or whatever, and they feel that this tool is kind of overriding specifications that we already have and so on. But anyway, the point here is that this tool is fairly simple. It takes developers a really small time to fill in all the answers, and it's not really like duplicate information. It's just information that is helpful in addition to all the other stuff we already have. Um, Other uses for the tool, because the forms are configurable, I had some developers ask if I could create a requirements form for like third-party services which I'd used as part of some of our own tools for internal use or public use. So I just went about doing that. So for the software we create ourselves, we of course have requirements that specify the development lifecycle. But if we get a service from outside, we of course don't really have much influence on how third parties do their own software development. But the one thing where we have this control is the contract we have with the third party. So this particular form kind of tries to assess the contractual status of services sourced from the outside. And we have some other stuff going on. For example, if you want to check compliance to standards, we can just like take the standards documents and turn them into a form and start filling those. So you can do whatever you want. Basically, this is just a glorified tool to present forms and collect answers. So anyway, I only talked about this tool right now. So there's a lot that goes into an application security program. Like you basically want a community to support the application security program. That's called security champions. I'm not going to talk about that. Then you need to do a lot of other stuff like train the developers, do awareness trainings, and there's all the managerial and administrative stuff related to security, like how do you actually get people to do things which they didn't do before. So I'm not going to talk about these either, but we can talk about these in private or in other channels. Here's a link to the security self-assessment tool. The link is probably can be pasted somewhere in Discord as well, so ask for it, please. Anyway, the things I've learned so far when creating an application security program. So at first, when I started, I thought that the problems would be mostly about technical stuff. So how to start doing things in a more secure way, or how to write code in a secure way, or how to incorporate tool X into development workflow. These are kind of the easy parts. It's technical problems, they are always easy, but the hard parts are, for example, how to secure budget to start using new tools, or how to make people that manage the teams that develop software, how to make these people assign actual like man hours or woman hours or person hours to security activities. So it's about kind of winning all the people to your side and trying to make them see that increasing the security is kind of a good thing for everybody. And of course, it's about managing risks and getting to know where the risks are and writing better code. It's always good and helpful, but you need to kind of prove that to everybody. Um, Also, in most cases, if you're doing application security, it's entirely possible that you don't have many people to talk about that. So remember to network and meet other people. We have some application security people in HelSec as well, and probably watching this talk as well. So reach out and talk with other people. That's helpful. Uh, that's basically all, and I don't have Juho to ask me questions, so I need to actually look at Discord myself and read your questions. Hold on. So here we go. We have two questions. Somebody called S. Heikki asked, how did you get the devs fill the SSA form in the first place? Asking, nice. You hear me now? Oh, cool. It was probably my headphones cutting off. Anyway, I'll get back to the questions. So, somebody called S. Heikki asked, how did you get the developers to fill the SSA form in the first place? Did I ask nicely or use bribery threats or something else? Um, that wasn't actually too difficult. So when I was designing the form and the tool, I tried to get input from pretty much everybody to make sure the questions or requirements in the form made sense. So I talked with developers and people in the privacy teams and legal teams and compliance teams and so on. So in a way, when the form was ready and the tool was ready, a lot of people already kind of had participated in creating it in the first place. So there was kind of a shared ownership in a way. And nobody was really against doing it anyway because I designed it to take very little time. So it's like 15 minutes to fill in a project. So typically I would ask like people like lead developers and architects and product owners. So a combination of, for example, product owner and lead developer would be a good combination. So it wasn't difficult because they got useful information out of it and it didn't take much time. Then we had somebody called Mr. Turkusex asking what was the most hard or confusing or annoying thing while creating SSA? Um, I don't know, maybe writing Python code that didn't suck. So I mean, I always enjoy writing tools, so that's kind of my favorite things to do anyway. And Jaroneko asked, is there going to be a CSEC for the utmost insecure meeting location? I'm totally down for that. So last year we did a CDF in Nuxia, and there's been some requests for doing it this year as well. So maybe Nuxia CDF happens as well. But if anybody is willing to join me on a nearby island to do a CDF, just please let me know and we'll throw a CSEC as well. Um, see, we don't have any more questions. So that concludes my talk, and could you please hold on for a while and I'll provide some closing words for this meetup. So I'll be back real soon.